everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm so happy that you wanted to join me today because today we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to take you guys through some of my favorite books of all time. This was something that I've seen other people do online, and I got the inspiration to do this video from Cami Patton, aka Supreme Banana, because she has made tons of really good book related videos and I find that to be super interesting. It's cool to find out what other people are reading and what other people are interested in. So I thought I wanted to do that here on this channel as well, because there's also the notion of how sustainability ties in with all of this. And there's also the fact that I'm actually publishing a book very soon. It's going to be in Danish, and hopefully I will at some point be able to translate it into English and publish that as well. But for now it's a Danish book that will hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, be out during September. So I'm really excited about it. This was not at all a plug for my book, okay. I want to talk to you guys about what books I love to read, both fiction and non-fiction. I've sort of tried to divide it into these two categories. Okay, hopefully this is not going to be a super long video. So the first one, I'm kind of like, is it fiction? Is it non-fiction? It's Stephen Fry's Mythos, and I love this book to bits. I read this on the train from Hamburg back to Aalborg, and it's such a cool book. First of all, because I love Greek mythology. Greek mythology is some of the coolest things. Like, there's so much fun stuff there, and sort of like, oh, he gave birth to her from a forehead. Yeah, cool. Stephen Fry retells the myths of the Greek gods in such a funny, humorous, and just really interesting way. Now I have something that's a little bit more nostalgic, but something I like. I could never let go of this. This is a book by Astrid Lindgren. It is a Swedish author, and she has made tons of amazing children's books that are also really relevant for adults. But this is by far my favorite. It's called Ronja Røverdatter, or in English, Ronja the Robber's Daughter. I think there is like an anime kind of cartoon series on Netflix. The book was also made into a movie, and that show on Netflix is very similar to that movie. Like, basically down to frame by frame, it's very similar. But this was my favorite book growing up. I wanted to be her. I wanted to live in the forest in a cave and make small weird pieces of bread on like warm stones. It's definitely one of those things. If I ever get a daughter, she's also going to be called Ronja. I could also have mentioned Harry Potter in the series of favorite fiction books, but I think that is very self-explanatory. I don't really want to dedicate a large portion of the video talking about Harry Potter because obviously I love it. Another book that I really like, also fiction, is The Oyster Thief, and this was actually one that got sent to me last year, and I have really been enjoying it. It's by Sonia Fakwi. I hope I'm saying that right, but this is an amazing book about a mermaid who doesn't want to get married, and a scientist guy who invents fire that can burn underwater. There's a lot of sustainability and environmental issues featured in this, and it's very critical of like the oil industry and stuff like that. It's good. So one of my favorite authors of all time is Jonathan Safran Foer, and just he writes in such an amazing way and tone, and just he is also very eco-critical, and there's also a lot of environmental issues reflected in his books. And Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close was one I had to read while at uni, and it was kind of mandatory to read it, but there's a lot of mandatory reading that I didn't do. But when I heard that we were going to read this book, I got like a hard copy of it. I found that, and it's just, I have been loving this book. I think I read it in a matter of 1 or 2 days. It was so good. It's written in a very interesting way, so if stuff in the book is moving very fast or people are stressed out, all of the words are very tightly together, so you're going to read it like very fast paced as well. And if something is almost like traumatic, everything moves by super slow, like a moment can take several hours, basically, you know, that kind of feeling. Then it's written like that, and that's really cool. So you really get like a physical sensation of what the characters are feeling. And Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close is about a guy called Oscar, and he loses his dad on 9/11, and this is about how he sees clues his dad has left him throughout New York, and he's imagining that his dad has left him this giant treasure hunt, and it's oh so heartbreaking and oh so amazing. And by the way, Oscar's a vegan. This was a book I read during last winter, and it is called Artemis. Artemis is written by Andy Weir and it is an amazing sci-fi novel. I'm not really necessarily into too supernatural, sci-fi, unrealistic kind of stuff. Said the girl who just promoted a book about a mermaid, cool. But this was so good. It's about a woman who lives on the moon, and Uganda has a huge space program. So they have a space station on the moon, and a lot of things happened on Earth. So now people also live on the moon, and it's sort of become like a tourist attraction. And she wants to take people on tours outside on the moon, and then she gets involved with crime. I do remember it being really, really tense and exciting, and you're really like invested in this book. I was really invested in this book at least, and it has a really strong female lead, which is also something I really appreciate, and she kicked ass all the way through this book. So yeah. We are getting into some of the a little earlier literature because I am also like that kind of girl. So I am going to promote to you Charles Dickens' Hard Times, which is also a lot about like social dynamics, economics, environment, sustainability, industrialization, all of this stuff is in Hard Times. Hard Times was written in the 1850s and it is about a place called Coketown, and Coketown is like this really overly industrialized place. And if you know a little bit about Dickens, he was very, very critical of the over-industrialized world, and he was writing a lot of stuff about how people are suffering from over-industrialization. And when I read this, I was really thinking about Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall, because that's basically the mood of this book. Then a book from one of my favorite writers of all time, which is Oscar Wilde. Are you surprised? The Picture of Dorian Gray is on this. This was written in 1890, and The Picture of Dorian Gray is a piece of Victorian literature that is so flippin' important. It is a book about a young guy called Dorian Gray, whose main feature is that he is so intensely beautiful. And because he's so beautiful, the way people value him and the way he is praised is from his looks and appearance. So that is sort of the only thing that matters to him. And he gets this artist guy called Basil, the permission to paint a portrait of him. And that portrait becomes so flippin' popular. Listening to me trying to recap The Picture of Dorian Gray by saying so flippin' popular, cool. But the portrait of Dorian turns out to be really, really good. And he sort of makes a deal with the devil that he will never ever age. And throughout his life, because he keeps being young and beautiful and attractive, he does a lot of not so great stuff. And although his outsides won't age, the picture of him decays with the indulgences he participates in. So the portrait becomes an indicator of his soul, his true self, and that is sort of like his downfall. There's so many cool quotes from Oscar Wilde. He was an Irish author, and when I was in Dublin in 2011, I think, so almost 10 years ago, I saw the statue of him and I cried. Nerd. I have to mention this book, although it's sort of like a cliche, it's on every basic must-read list, but it is Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. This is one of the first books I read where I was like, whoa. It's about a specific mindset, a philosophy, a way to look out upon life, and that is explained through the journey of a man who's journeying through the desert. I like The Alchemist. I think it's a great book. And a little bit poetry for my girl. Songs of Innocence and Experience by William Blake is one of my favorite collections of poetry of all time. Whenever I'm nervous, I'm reciting the poem Tiger. Tiger, tiger. One second, I'll just go. Because this book also has his paintings in it, and it's just intensely pretty. Here we have it. Look at this. Oh yeah. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? And I actually also have that tattooed on me. The last book in the fiction category that I want to mention is a book by an author called Donatien Alphonse François de Sade, or better known as the Marquis de Sade, the theoretical and philosophical creator of sadomasochism. In the 1790s, he wrote a book called Justine, or like he didn't do it all in one go. He was in prison for basically his entire life. If you look into the life of the Marquis de Sade, you're going to find yourself like, blah. No question, he was an awful person, and all of this will tie together, I promise. But he wrote a book called Justine, and I have like a little tiny version of it because it's really long. Justine is the most awful piece of literature I have ever read in my entire life. It is so vile and awful. You cannot basically take your eyes off it. There should be an immense amount of trigger warnings, so if you're in any way sensitive to most topics, I would not recommend this book, but it was super interesting to read. I read this book because of my dissertation last summer. I wanted to write something about female sexuality and how female sexuality has been portrayed in literature throughout Western history, and for that I really wanted to discuss the sort of the trope or the cliche of the suffering beautiful woman, because that's something you see from the Victorian ages and way before that as well, and then all the way up to Marilyn Monroe and her death pictures, and there's just so much stuff there. Justine is a story about virtue versus vice, and it's a story about the battle of morality. It shows how the innocent and beautiful and pure young girl Justine, by the way, age 14, is constantly taking advantage of, abused, assaulted. There's so many things. It's awful. While her sister, Juliet, who goes in a slightly other direction, who is employed at a brothel right after both their parents die, choose the path of vice, and how that has sort of rewarded her and that has paid her off. It's such an interesting book, and when we get into the non-fiction parts of my favorite books, this is going to make way more sense. So just because the first non-fiction book that I want to recommend to you guys is Angela Carter's The Sadeian Woman. And the Sadeian here refers to Marquis de Sade and his writings and what they have taught us, and how, most importantly, they have influenced literature and culture in the West from the 1700s and until then. And there's a lot to uncover here. It's so flipping interesting. This is an account of the ideology of pornography and how women and female sexuality is perceived in the real world. And then she uses the texts and stories of the Marquis de Sade to show where this comes from. He has sort of, like the Marquis de Sade, has shaped a lot of our perception of what female beauty and female sexuality is, and why innocence and purity is such an important part of that. I was shooketh from this book. I have even like lined different pages inside this book where I just think it's so interesting. So if you're interested in this topic, I definitely recommend The Sadeian Woman. But on a slightly different note, I have another book by Jonathan Safran Foer, and it's Eating Animals. There can be no book recommendations video without eating animals. If you're interested in vegan literature and anything of the sort, this is a full circle moment, because it perfectly combines the ethics of veganism with the detrimental factors in context of the environment and animal agriculture. It's it's a splendid piece of work, this one is. This book critiques how an entire industry sees animals and individuals as commodities and objects for sale, as consumer goods, and it's just, oh, and I cried when I saw the documentary. I cried my eyes out. It was absolutely horrifying, but not in like it's not preachy, it's not like far-fetched or anecdotal. It's very just read this book. I am not good with the words today, but that's just because literature just usually gets me blown completely away. I can completely fall in love and fall completely into the universe of whatever I'm reading, and that can happen with non-fiction as well. When I graduated from uni, I was fed up with fiction, because I've been reading fiction for such a long time, so I sort of dived into a non-fiction haul of literature, and in that haul I found a lot of really interesting things, and a lot of them I want to talk to you about now. The first one being Neil deGrasse Tyson's Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. I've never been good with math or numbers or physics or anything like that, because I have synesthesia. It's intensely difficult for me to tell everything apart, and I see numbers in colors, and it's really frustratingly confusing. But Neil deGrasse Tyson explains some of the like more basic fundamental ideas of astrophysics in such a nice way, and with anecdotes that sort of see how this can be applied in the real world, and it makes you understand things, and I really like that. It makes you understand things. But it does. This was the first book about astrophysics that I read, and I was blown away by how normal, does that make sense? Normally this was written in layman's terms, so everyone can understand really complex issues. Yeah. I was really curious about this subject after having read Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, so I went online and I looked for a Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. And this was a slightly more complex and slightly more difficult to read, but it was still written in terms that were easy to understand, and although I had to concentrate a little bit harder with this one, I still got through it and I still understood pretty much everything it said. But I was really stoked, and it was kind of a milestone for me to read both of those books, because it's something that always sort of branded myself as something I don't know shit about. And it kind of bothered me for a long time that I didn't really understand a lot of these things. And I found this, I think it was around the time where there was a lot about Stephen Hawking everywhere, and like such a cool person as well, like both him and Neil, like both such amazing people. So it's also a pleasure to read what they wrote. Okay, so the next one I don't have with me because I actually lent it to one of my friends, but it is Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. I feel like the most basic girl when I plug this book, because I've plugged it to everyone I know, but god damn it. It might as well have been called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, get it? And like, it was just, oh, so many of these things that were talked about in this book. This is kind of a self-help book for people that despise self-help books. But so many of the situations that were talked about are like statements I just felt hit right at home. So there was one of the chapters where he was talking about how when you care a lot about stuff, you will feel personally victimized or attacked by people who care less, and you will see that as a personal attack towards you because you chose to care so much. It was just what I needed to hear, and I think I read this book at a point in time where I really needed to hear this stuff. So if you are struggling with like loneliness or with like guilt of unproductiveness, overproductiveness, generally how to be in the world, and especially when it comes to sustainability, I think this was super helpful, because we end up caring a lot. We end up feeling so anxious and full of guilt and shame when we do something wrong, and this book really helped me categorize these emotions and these feelings and let some of them go. So yeah, big shout out to The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. Moving on to a book that I actually have with me. This is a book called The Written World. This is an account of how we culturally, globally, have used the written word to shape culture and to shape minds and personalities and everything, and how it takes us all the way back to the first books ever produced, and it takes us back to Sanskrit, and we have accounts of different religions and how they have used writing, how the Greeks used writing, how like ancient Chinese culture used writing. This is such an interesting piece of literature. If you are interested in language, I definitely recommend this book. It's written by a man called Martin Pushner, and the tagline is How Literature Shaped History, which I knew that it did, but not to the extent that this book goes into it. And it talks a lot about ancient cultures, but it also mentions Donald Trump's tweets and Harry Potter. It goes all the way through history, and I think I just, full circle moments, they sort of just, they get me. And the last book that I want to mention is Zero Waste by Shia Soup. Who is also known as Wasteland Rebel. And this was the first book about zero waste that I ever got. I know her quite well. She's an amazing content creator, and one of those I was really inspired by when I first started Zero Waste. And there's actually an acknowledgement in this book for my website. It says, so here there is like going zero waste, treading my own path, snapshots of simplicity, the rogue ginger, the kind planet, the girl gone green, Paris to go, the zero waste chef, sustainably vegan, and getting married. This has amazing recipes and tips and small hacks and how to avoid different kinds of waste. This is a brilliant book that I'm really happy to have, and I read it when I got it. I loved it. It's amazing. And since then I have accumulated more books about zero waste, especially from content creators that I know, because it's amazing to see these people's hard work in a physical form when you're used to just watching them online. But that was all the books that I wanted to recommend or simply just talk to you about. I hope that you liked this video. This is a little bit different from what I usually do, but I hope this is something that you were interested in. If not, I guess you probably like scrolled away. I would love to know, however, what are your favorite books? What are your favorite book recommendations? And what books touched you the most and has shaped the way that you are perceiving yourself on others, or diet, or whatever? Like, what kind of books have had a very impactful meaning to you? I would love, love, love to know. Thank you so much for watching this video. Before you go, please hit that subscribe button and also that little thumbs uppy button if you like this video. That would just make my day. Thank you so much. Have a great day and take really good care of yourselves. Until next time. Bye. Thank you so much for watching this video, and also a special thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys help me create green zero waste content and I love you guys. You can find the links to my social media accounts down below and the link to my Patreon on this screen. Bye!